Some of you might know the name Jeff Foxworthy, a stand-up comedian who has made himself really famous by telling redneck jokes. And I just will say, if you please bear with me, there's one-liner statements that he made. It's kind of like if you might be a redneck if you're mowing the yard and you find a car. Or you might be a redneck if you have a gun rack on your bicycle. You might be a redneck if your mom got thrown out of the bingo party for bad language. Or you might be a redneck if your wife has more kids than teeth. Ouch, right? Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about contentment and covetousness this morning. So perhaps we could say things like that. You might have a problem with contentment and covetousness if you had to buy a new lawnmower when the other one was fine. You might have a problem with contentment or covetousness if you wouldn't think about riding a bicycle if it's the only thing you had. You might have a problem with covetousness and contentment if bingo wouldn't do, you have to play the lottery. And we could go on. This morning I want, as we look at this subject, please don't think about somebody else that needs to hear this, okay? Let's all say, God, help me to see deep into my own heart, all right? Let's take a look. Ecclesiastes chapter 5. We'll look at the first, as we have it divided in three sections, our passage this morning. The first is verses 8 and 9. Let me read it. If you see oppression of the poor and denial of justice and righteousness in the province, do not be shocked at the sight. For one official watches over another official, and there are higher officials over them. After all, a king who cultivates the field is an advantage to the land. If you see, do not be shocked at the sight. In other words, what he's saying is basically it's to be expected. If you see this, well, you can expect to see it. And what is that? Oppression, the denial of justice and righteousness, or corruption. Corruption is what you might see. One official watches over another official, there are higher officials over them. Basically, what he's saying is oppression goes up the chain. And so those who are higher up, they're profiting from those underneath them. And they're taking advantage of those underneath them just as you go on up the chain. Well, he's not saying that it's okay. What he is saying is don't be surprised by it. Don't be surprised if ruling authorities are profiting through corruption. So the point here in these first two verses is corruption is inevitable. Corruption is inevitable. You're just going to see it. This flies in the face of what's in our culture, what's being told to us, and that is that man is basically good. And this is saying, not true. Verse 9 says, a king who cultivates the land is an advantage to the land. Difficult to be sure about what this means. The different translations, if we look at it, we might ask the question, well, who does the cultivating, the king or the people? Because it looks like it's different in different translations. Or who profits? Is it the king or the people or just the land? When we try to compare them, it's hard to tell. I think what we can say is cultivated, producing fields are a good thing, even though there may be corruption in the land. Corruption's inevitable. World history and current affairs would concur, right? I think they would. Okay, I think we have a stop. Check, we have a...
You might be a redneck if...
A Chrysler 200 Silver has an alarm that's going off. You're not a redneck if that's you, okay? But you do have a problem, right? Okay. Technology, its problems are inevitable. Corruption's inevitable is what we're talking about. World history, if we think about world history, if we think about even our current affairs, it would concur that corruption, it is just going to be something we see. And this is evidence of what God says about humanity. For example, Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is more deceitful than all else and is desperately sick. Who can understand it? So God says about the human heart. It began at the garden, Genesis chapter 3. Sin entered into the human race. It's been passed through all humanity. We all have been infected with it. And so in our heart, we have this propensity to resist God, to exert our own will, and to strive to please ourselves, to be independent of God's authority over us. And so Romans 3:23 will say, "For all have sinned." And this is what humanity is like. So why is he writing it here? This is where it gets hard to understand. I mean, he just wrote about worship and vows. What's the connection here? I don't really see necessarily a connection. It looks more like he's introducing the new subject. Work and money is what we'll see as we get a little bit further. And we see by the time we get to verse 19, to rejoice in your labor. If we go back in chapter 3, verse 13, see good in it. And in verse 22, nothing is better. So what's the point of talking about oppression? That's right in the middle of talking about work and money. Oppression can steal our ability to enjoy our work and the fruit of it. Oppression can take that away. It can make it very, very difficult. So, and maybe your circumstances are just like this. Maybe you have an authority in your life, a boss, or someone who's making life very difficult, making your job difficult. Maybe it's something with what you have. It's become difficult. When we see oppression, it upsets us. It should. It upsets us. When we can't do anything about it, we can get angry about it. We expect our government to fix things and not allow it to happen. And when they don't, it gets very difficult. And so it can be hard to enjoy our work and the fruit from it. So let me just give you this little piece of practical advice before we move on. Because it's just going to be, because we live in the human race, we're just going to see it. We're going to see it. So here's a word. Hebrews 12:15 says, "See to it that no one comes short of the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springing up causes trouble, and by it many be defiled." So be careful. In other words, you're experiencing oppression. You see it around. You hear about it. It's upsetting. It's frustrating. It's maddening. Be careful that a root of bitterness doesn't enter deep down into your heart, and then you have all sorts of problems. So what do? Just accept it? Let's keep looking at the passage and see what he says. The next subject is covetousness. Covetousness is a strong, if not an excessive, desire to have things. This section, verses 10 to 17, is divided into two sections. In each section, there is a what advantage is it? Each of them has a what advantage. The first one talks about a vanity, and the second one, a grievous evil. So let's look at the vanity first, verses 10 to 12. "He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves abundance with its income. This too is vanity. When good things increase, those who consume them increase. So what is the advantage to their owners except to look on? The sleep of the working man is pleasant, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich man does not allow him to sleep." Okay, he's talking about a vanity. He's talking about the person who, what? Who loves money, who loves the abundance of the income from having a lot of money. He has a strong desire to have it, to have more. This is who he's talking about. And it says what? He'll not be satisfied with it. What he expects to get from having a lot, what he expects to return, what he wants it to give him, he won't find. It won't be fulfilling. He won't be content. So it is a vanity. Now, it's a vanity for two reasons we see in these verses. First of all, in verse 11, when good things increase, those who consume them increase. In other words, when you have more, the people around you want more from you. And suddenly there's more people that appear that want something from you. Win the lottery and you'll find out, right? So the more we have, so essentially what he's saying is that, then it says, so what's the advantage to their owners except to look on? What can you expect from your hard work? I like the way the New Living Translation says, what good is wealth except perhaps to watch it slip through your fingers? Essentially, that's what he's saying. What good is it? You have it, it's just going to slip through your fingers. Verse 12, there's a contrast. The sleep of the working man is pleasant, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich man doesn't allow him to sleep. He's got what? He's got worries. He's got worry about losing his money. He's got worry about taking care of it. Is it making money like it should? He's got all this stress. So the person that loves to have money, that loves to have this abundance, they're going to have problems. They're going to have to deal with sponges and stresses. That's what he's saying, basically. Secondly, there's this grievous evil. It's kind of, this section, verses 13 to 17, it's bookended with that phrase. So let's take a look at it. Verse 13. There's a grievous evil which I have seen under the sun, riches being hoarded by their owner to his hurt. When those riches were lost through a bad investment, and he had fathered a son, then there was nothing to support him. As he had come naked from his mother's womb, so will he return as he came. He will take nothing from the fruit of his labor that he can carry in his hand. This also is a grievous evil. Exactly as a man is born, thus will he die. So what is the advantage to him who toils for the wind? Throughout his life, he also eats in darkness with great vexation, sickness, and anger. It's a grievous evil. What is it? It's riches being hoarded by their owner to his hurt. To hoard is to do what? To hoard is try to keep. It's try to hang on to it. It's to try to protect what a person has. It's a not willingness to part with what they have. So he says to the one that hoards what he has like that, hoards to his hurt. What hurt? He gives two examples in this passage. Verse 14. When riches were lost through a bad investment, he had a son, there was nothing to support him. So what does that mean? Presumably what he's talking about is the hoarder, because he's trying to protect what he has separated himself from people. Because people are sponges, right? So he's tried to separate himself from people. He tried to hang on to it. Suddenly he lost it, and guess what? He needs help, and there's nobody to help him. People aren't interested. People don't know. Because he was a hoarder. And so his hurt is that what he gives up to try to keep it is what it will cost him. Second example, verses 15 and 16. Just as he had come naked from his mother's womb, so will he return. He'll take nothing from the fruit of his labor that he can carry in his hand. Exactly as a man is born with nothing, right? Thus will he die. In other words, that you've heard the saying, there's no U-Hauls after the hearse. Right? You don't take it with you. This is what he's saying. This is why he's saying it's grievous. It's hurt. It's a hurt. He says, what is the advantage to him who toils for the wind? It's a picture of futility. It's a hurt that he worked hard to get it and hang on to it, and he can't. And here it's called a grievous evil. When we think of grief, we think of something that's what? Sad. Evil is something that's bad. So I call it a grievous evil, a bad sad. It's a bad sad that a position is, that person is in, the one who tries to hoard things. Because he can't control it. He can't hang on to it. And then verse 17 is kind of a summary. Throughout his life, he also eats in darkness with great vexation, sickness, and hunger. Throughout his life, he also eats in darkness. That's a word picture. It's a picture of eating, it's a picture of his existence. And he's saying throughout his life, his existence is pathetic. It's miserable. This person. Vexation, that's irritation or annoyance. In other words, as he looks around him, he just gets irritated and annoyed at the circumstances and the people because this is a position that he's in. And so sickness and anger are part of his hurt as well. This is saying to us that covetousness leads to problems. It leads to problems. This strong desire to get and to have and to keep money and wealth, it leads to problems of all sorts. The hurt of the covetousness, it is dealing with sponges and stresses, and it is the cost and futility of trying to keep it, trying to keep what you can't. So, obviously, his point is beware of covetousness, the love of money, or the hoarding of things. All right, so is he saying, does this mean that, well, it's wrong to work for money and to enjoy what you get from it? No, it's not, because that's exactly what he tells his readers to do. Work and enjoy the fruit of your labor. So that's not it. So is it wrong to save money? That's not what he's saying either. What's he talking about? He's talking about coveting, right? That's different. It's different. So there's a distinction, so we need to understand it. In the context, like corruption, just like corruption can make it difficult to enjoy one's work and when one has the fruit of it, so can covetousness. One is on the outside of you, the other's on the inside. And it can make it difficult to be content. Paul wrote it this way in 1 Timothy 6:10, "For the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil, and some by longing for it have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs." You know, as I looked at this, I found myself saying, you know, I don't think I really am aware of how detrimental covetousness can be to my life, to any of our lives. It's one of those things I think that we tend to think about, you know, well, a little bit doesn't hurt. It made me ask, can I even see it in me? How about you? Not can you see it in me, but can you see it in you, right? Is it there? Do you realize how destructive it can be? You know, I'll never forget many, many years ago, a conversation with an older man, and he would be, I would call him from a lower economic class. And he was just berating wealthy people as being greedy and all sorts of things. And yet, that's exactly what I saw in this man, by things that he did. It was just on a smaller scale. Coveting. You know what's in the Ten Commandments? Do you know what's generally in the sin list that we have in the New Testament? Its twin sister, greed, is called idolatry in Colossians 3:5. So how do you get away from it? If we think we might have it and we're kind of struggling, go, well, I don't know. What do I do to make sure that I'm going in just the opposite directions? What would be the opposite of coveting? Being generous. Generosity. Exactly. Guess what? In the virtue lists, we usually see generosity. That's what we see. All right, so here's a question I had to ask myself, and let me ask you to think about it, and then we'll move on. If everything that I had, if it were cut in half right now, okay, 2 cars goes to 1. If 2 couches goes to 1. If 4 tables around, or 4 chairs around the table goes to 2. If everything that I had was now worth half the value, So the car was a car that was worth half of what my car is right now. If that happened to me, what would that do to my scale of happiness on a scale of 1 to 10? What would it do if everything was cut in half? Any idea? I think that's an indicator. I think it's an indicator of what's going on inside. You know, Saturday, I'm going to go and I'm going to spend 2 weeks with people who don't have half what I do, don't have a fourth what I do. We'll be lucky if they have 1/10 of what I do. And you know what I'll see? Others who've been there will say, see quite a bit of happiness. You see quite a bit of happiness. All right, well, let's look at these last 3 verses. He kind of brings it really to a head here. Verse 18. Here's what I have seen to be good and fitting, to eat, to drink, and enjoy oneself in all one's labor in which he toils under the sun during the few years of his life which God has given him. For this is his reward. Furthermore, for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he has also empowered him to eat from them and to receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. For he will not often consider the years of his life, because God keeps him occupied with the gladness of his heart. All right, here's what I've seen to be good and fitting and his reward. So this is what Solomon says. This is what's good. This is what's fitting. This is a reward for the average person to see, to eat, to drink, and enjoy oneself in all his labor. It's best to just enjoy your work and enjoy the fruit that you have from it and not always want more. This is what he said back in chapter 3, verse 12, verse 22. So he says it here again. He's going to say it again in the book. To enjoy it. During the few years of his life which God has given him for his reward. Here's a perspective that he gives during the few years. You know, if there's a few people here that are a little bit older. You start to look back on your life and you go, where did all the years go? Where did they go? This is some perspective. Before you know it, your life is over. If you fret and stew about your bosses, about the politicians, about the ruling authorities in your life, if you get caught up trying to make more money, trying to hang on to more money, you're going to miss God's reward for today. Pretty solid. What he's saying, isn't it? What's God's reward? So tell us. It's contentment. It's being free from sponges and stresses. It's being freed from stewing and striving. It is being free from happiness that's tied to things we can't control. He goes on, verse 19. Furthermore, for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth. Okay, now he's talking about the person that has a lot. And notice he said that God has given. This is a person that has the high-paying job. This is a person that's received a pretty good inheritance. That's who he's talking to now. He says, he, meaning God, has also empowered him to eat from them and to receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. This is a gift of God. God has given to that person. This is a gift. You can enjoy what you have. God's blessed him with wealth, with some measure of wealth, and he's also blessed him with an ability to enjoy it. And so to them it is, don't fall into coveting. Don't fall into hoarding in your wealth. In verse 20, for he will not often consider the years of his life, because God keeps him occupied with the gladness of his heart. Okay. Who's the he that he's talking about? He's talking about the wealthy person? He's talking about the person in verse 18, just a common, ordinary person. He's talking about both. He's talking about the one who is able to find contentment. He'll not often consider. Some different translations say that he'll not much remember, or he seldom reflects. The point is, the one who has learned to enjoy what he has to eat and to drink and his labor, his enjoyment of what he has. Listen to that. His enjoyment for what he has, it will overshadow any of the hardships of the past. Those things don't drag him down anymore. Regrets and worries and stresses, no, they're not part of his life because he's learned that today I enjoy what God's given me. It's a point. God grants contentment to those who can see God's gifts in their circumstances. God grants contentment to those who can see God's gifts in their circumstances. To see one's work and one's lot as God's gift, and then to live generously. Generous to give, that's the way to find enjoyment in what God has given. So we may step back and say, can I see God's gifts in my work and lot in life? I don't care if you have a lot or little. We can ask ourselves, can I see that this is a gift that God has given me? And they're gifts like all sorts of different ways. Can you see it? We might ask, have I found contentment in my lot in life? Or does there always have to be more? Is there this dissatisfaction that just continues? Jesus said in John 15:11, "These things I've spoken to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be made full." Jesus said, my joy. What do you think about Jesus' joy? I'd say it's perfect, wouldn't you? His joy was perfect. He said, I'm telling you these things because I want you to have the same perfect joy that I have. I don't know about you, but when I read through the Gospels and I look at Jesus' life, I didn't see much there in terms of physical security and comfort and prosperity. I see very little, right? And yet, he has a perfect joy. He wants us to have that kind of joy. That's what he wants for us to have. In John 10:10, Jesus said, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Our adversary, he wants to steal the joy that Jesus gives us. He wants to kill it. He wants to destroy it. And how does he do that? By distorting, by deception. It's by making us think that we'll have happiness with things that we can't control, with things that will actually just cause more stress in our lives. We can ask ourselves one more question. Do I have the contentment of the abundant life? Jesus, he said, I want you to have an abundant life. I have it. It's a contented life. It's a life that says, I don't need more. It doesn't depend on physical security. It doesn't depend on an abundance of physical things. It doesn't depend on comfort. And it doesn't, and listen, and it doesn't depend on my willingness to just do with less. It depends on something different. It takes us to the cross, does it not? It takes us to the cross and to the empty tomb, where it tells us in 1 Corinthians 15, Christ died for our sins, and he rose the third day according to the Scriptures. It's through what Christ has done for us. It is there that he took the penalty for our sin. It's through his resurrection it was shown to be true. It is through him and what he did on the cross that we have life, eternal and abundant. And so he would say to Martha in John 11, I'm the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? I ask you, do you believe? That's all he asks us to do. Believe and walk with him. And the contented, abundant life that he wants us to have will be ours. Let me conclude with something that I found that I think kind of illustrates our point. Toby Mages, he's writing for Metro. It's a UK publication, and he did a little story on a guest that to a wedding that was contacted by the newlyweds, and basically it was to say that the gift wasn't generous enough. So this guest, unnamed, got in a forum, an online forum, to ask for advice what to do. And she said, I gave £100, a check for £100, and was told it wasn't enough. She said how the couple had asked for cash gifts and emailed to say they were, quote, surprised by her contribution and suggested an adjustment. She went on to say that the bride and groom declared, we were surprised that your contribution didn't seem to match the warmth of your good wishes on our big day. And so they said, in view of your own position, if you wanted to send any adjustment, it would be thankfully received. So the lady said, it was probably because I had received some inheritance recently. You can imagine what kind of responses she got for what she should do. Probably mostly not what a Christian should really do. And she didn't do them. Instead, she responded with this. Well, I assumed that this was a mistake. And she sent a picture of the placard that sat next to where the gifts were supposed to be. There's a picture of this placard, and it said, gift table. We thank you, but your presence is our greatest gift. Your presence is our greatest gift. And so she sent her a picture of that. I thought that was really good, right? We look at this and we go, wow, that newlywed couple, they weren't content with what they received, and that's just awful and terrible. But let me ask you this. Are we content with what God has given us? Are we really content with just his presence, or do we think we need more from him? Father, thank you for your word, the truth that it is. Father, as we read and we look at it and as we understand, we realize that your word is giving us what is true in life. For many of us, your word also shows us where we've gotten off track, where we have perhaps run amok or are headed in the wrong direction. Oh God, we want our lives to be accurate representations of what it means to have life, the abundant life that you give. Oh, forgive us, Father, for our discontent. Forgive us for every instance of love for money or hoarding that we have been guilty of. Oh God, help us to be a generous people. We pray, Father, that our lives will portray the contentment that you give. And we ask this in Jesus' name.